Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I missed you all so much. I've been a little under the weather lately, but I'm finally back, and I know some of you were waiting, wondering when the next story would come. Thank you for your patience and your kind messages. They meant the world. Tonight, I've got something truly special for you. So find a quiet place, settle in, and let your mind drift into the story world I've prepared just for you. As always, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share if this brings you peace, emotion, or even just a little escape. Now, let's begin. The night was a tapestry of hushed dread, a storm not just of wind and rain, but of some unseen, electric tension was brewing on the horizon. Elias felt it in the marrow of his bones. For 20 years, since the night his younger brother, Leo, had vanished from their shared bedroom, Elias's nights had been a wasteland. His insomnia wasn't a mere inconvenience. It was a scar, a constant, gnawing reminder of a past he couldn't reconcile with. He was a keeper of the vigil, a sentry at the gates of sleep, forever waiting for a ghost to return. His apartment, a silent testament to his solitude, was filled with the relics of his long, waking nights, stacks of unread books, a half-finished chess set he played against himself, and a collection of meticulously organized notebooks filled with nonsensical ramblings and sketches of a boy's face he could barely remember. Tonight, however, was different. A weight had settled on him, a weariness so profound it felt like a physical entity. It was an exhaustion that had been building for decades, a debt finally coming due. He felt a strange peace in it, a sense of surrender that was both terrifying and comforting. He laid in his bed, a place that had always been a battleground, and felt the first tendrils of true rest wrap around him. The world outside his window, usually so loud in its silence, began to soften. The streetlights blurred into hazy halos, and the low hum of the city faded into a gentle murmur. His mind, usually a chaotic storm of memories and anxieties, was becoming a calm sea. The faces of doctors who had prescribed countless pills, the worried looks of his parents, the pitying glances of acquaintances, all of it began to dissolve. His eyelids, so accustomed to the perpetual state of being open, felt impossibly heavy. They were not just muscles giving way to fatigue. They were doors closing on a long-abandoned house. As they finally shut, the world of the living receded, and a new world, a world of dreams and forgotten things, opened up before him. He was not falling, but floating. The darkness behind his eyes was not an absence of light, but a luminous void, a canvas waiting for a forgotten artist. He felt a gentle pull, a current carrying him deeper into this abyss. He was a castaway finally reaching a shore, a traveler arriving at a destination he didn't know he'd been seeking. Suddenly, a memory flickered to life. He was a boy again, small and hopeful, sitting on the floor of a sun-drenched living room. Leo, his brother, was there. He was building a fortress of blankets and pillows, his laugh echoing like a bell. Elias could smell the faint scent of cinnamon from their mother's baking and the dusty comfort of their old rug. The memory was so vivid, so real, he could feel the scratch of the wool on his skin. This wasn't a memory he had ever recalled in his waking life. It was a buried treasure, unearthed by the deep-sea dredge of his sleep. The memory shifted, becoming more ominous. The sun-drenched room turned to the moonlit one where Leo had disappeared. He saw himself, a young boy, clutching a teddy bear, watching as Leo crept out of the window. He was running toward a secret he couldn't share. A feeling of dread, cold and sharp, pierced the fragile peace of the dream. Elias, the adult, felt the old, familiar knot of guilt tighten in his chest. He had seen him go, but had been too scared to stop him. The dream world was not just a replay of his past, it was an interrogation. He was being forced to confront the moments he had locked away, the truths he had buried. He saw his younger self, a tiny figure standing in the doorway, paralyzed by fear. He saw the empty space in the bed where Leo should have been, the cold sheets a symbol of a void that had swallowed his life. The dream changed again, and he was no longer an observer, but a participant. He was Leo, running through the cold night. He felt the sting of the wind, the rough texture of the pavement under his bare feet. He saw the reason for the flight. A man, a stranger, waiting in a dark car at the end of the street. This was a detail he had never known, a piece of the puzzle that had been missing for 2 decades. The man in the car was a silhouette, a void in the moonlight, but Elias felt a jolt of recognition, a sense of deep, foreboding familiarity as the night wore on. Elias's sleep became a journey through the labyrinth of his own mind. He was confronting the very essence of his insomnia, the root cause of his endless vigil. It wasn't just guilt, it was a desperate, subconscious hope that if he stayed awake long enough, he could somehow rewrite that night, that he could stop Leo from leaving. He dreamed of conversations he never had, of apologies he never made, of a life that could have been. He dreamt of a future where his brother returned, a man with a haunted look in his eyes, but alive. He felt a torrent of emotions he had kept locked away for years. Anger, grief, and a profound, aching love for the boy who had been his other half. The storm outside raged and then, slowly, gave way to the quiet whispers of the dawn. The first rays of sunlight, weak and hesitant, filtered through his window. For the first time in his adult life, Elias didn't stir. He was still in the depths of his dream, working through the final pieces of his personal mystery. His face, usually a mask of weary tension, was soft, peaceful. The lines of worry around his eyes had faded. He breathed deeply, the sound a gentle rhythm of a man finally at peace with his past. This wasn't just a night of sleep, it was a spiritual pilgrimage. It was a confrontation with his demons, a dialogue with his ghost, and a deep, healing acceptance of what had been lost. When he finally opened his eyes, the world was washed in the soft, golden light of morning. He felt different. He felt whole. The weight on his chest was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar lightness. He looked at the clock on his nightstand. Its numbers no longer a tormentor, but a friendly witness. He had slept, truly slept, for the first time in 20 years. And in that one long, profound night, he had found something he had been looking for all along: the truth. Story 2 inched the house at the edge of memory. The wind carried with it the sound of distant bells. Not church bells, no. These were more like the soft, hollow chimes of something old and rusted, swaying from a tree no one had seen in years. For most people, the edge of town meant the end of things. But for Eloise, it was only the beginning. She arrived just before dusk, the kind of arrival that makes no noise. No slam of car doors, no clicking heels, no fanfare. Just a whisper against the gravel road and the thud of a suitcase on a wooden porch that hadn't felt footsteps in decades. The house stood at the very end of a forgotten lane, overgrown with memory and moss, its windows darkened by the dust of time. No one had lived here since her grandmother passed, and yet Something in the silence welcomed her like a long-lost friend. Inside, the air was thick but not suffocating. It smelled of lavender and old books, of wood warmed by sun and cooled by storms. As Eloise stepped across the threshold, the boards beneath her feet sighed with the weight of the past, as though the house itself remembered her. She didn't come here by accident. No, she was running, in that quiet, weary way people run when they've lost more than they can explain. Her life in the city had cracked open, too loud, too rushed, too full of people who smiled with their mouths, but not their eyes. She needed somewhere to break apart, or maybe to put herself back together. The house, with its forgotten corners and ghost of warmth, seemed to understand. There was no electricity, but that suited her. She lit a few candles, one in each room she planned to use, the flickering flames casting soft glows on floral wallpaper that peeled like shedding skin. Her grandmother had always said the house was alive, that it listened, that it forgave. Eloise wasn't sure she believed that, but tonight, she hoped. She made her way to the attic, not for any reason other than the pull of something quiet and unresolved. The stairs groaned in protest, but they held her. The door at the top stuck for a moment, then gave way, opening into a room that felt preserved in amber. Toys lined the walls, books lay stacked on a small wooden desk, and in the corner sat a velvet chair beside a tall window, where the moonlight poured in like a blessing. Saturday there were no thoughts yet, just sensations. The way her fingers tingled in the cool air, the rhythm of her breathing in this unfamiliar place. She let the silence wrap around her like a blanket, and she watched the world through the attic window, watched the shadows grow longer, watched the light shift and twist and dissolve into night. And then the memories began. Not hers, not entirely. It was as if the house had been waiting to speak, to share stories of those who'd come before, of love letters never sent, of footsteps in the hall at midnight, of lullabies hummed through tears. She felt them, not like visions, but like emotions slipping into her bloodstream. She remembered being small and watching her grandmother stitch a red quilt by hand, humming that same tune over and over. She remembered sneaking cookies from the kitchen, the way the sunlight used to spill through the pantry window. But then there were memories she did not own, of laughter she never heard, names she'd never spoken, sorrows she couldn't place. The house was telling her something. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked, though she was alone. Or so she thought. She stood slowly, heart steady, and followed the sound. Candle in hand, she moved like someone half awake, like a dreamer drawn by an invisible thread. In the parlor, she found a photograph she'd never seen before. A woman who looked exactly like her, but not her. The same eyes, the same mouth, but dressed in the style of decades past. On the back, a name she didn't recognize, and a date, 1913. She held it close to her chest and closed her eyes. And for a moment, she was there. Not here, not now, but in that sepia-colored world. A streetcar rumbling past. The scent of fresh bread. A man waiting with flowers in his hand and regret in his eyes. A love story that never reached its ending. When she opened her eyes, the house felt warmer. The next morning, she woke before sunrise. Not because of a noise, but because of a calm she hadn't felt in years. The kind of peace that only comes after a good cry or a deep sleep. She opened the kitchen window and let the breeze carry away what remained of yesterday's dust, and she began to clean. Not just for herself, but for the memory of this place. The sink ran with cold water. The soap smelled faintly of rosemary, and as she scrubbed, she found more than dirt. She found a letter folded beneath a floorboard, yellowed with age, edges brittle, but the words clear. My dearest, if you find this, I hope you remember how we danced under the lantern light, how your laugh made the stars jealous. I left this behind because I couldn't carry it, but you were always braver than me. You stayed, and for that, this place remembers you. Eloise read it aloud, her voice soft but certain. The house listened. Each day, she uncovered more. A child's drawing under a loose stair. A pressed flower between book pages. A music box that still played, though the key was rusted. And with each discovery, the house grew brighter, less haunted, more hold a tea night. She dreamed of the woman in the photo, not as a stranger, but as a guide. They would walk together through rooms that shimmered like memories, through forests where the trees whispered names Eloise had never heard, but somehow knew. They would sit beneath moonlight and speak without words, as if all that had been lost was being returned, piece by piece. Eloise stopped counting days. There was no need. Time here wasn't linear. It moved in circles, spirals, waves. Some mornings she felt 20 again, on others 70. But always she felt real, rooted. Then, one evening, a knock at the door. She hadn't expected visitors. She hadn't told anyone she was here. She opened the door to find a man holding a journal. He introduced himself as Thomas, a local historian. He said he was writing about the forgotten homes at the edge of town and had been searching for this one for years. He asked if he could come in. Eloise hesitated, then nodded as he stepped inside. He paused. He said the place felt alive, that it was breathing. She offered him tea, and they talked well into the night. About the past, about the people who once danced in this house, about stories buried in silence. He showed her pages of the journal, entries from her grandmother, even one from the woman in the photo. Her name was Lillian. Lillian, it turned out, had disappeared one summer and was never found. Rumors said she ran away. Others whispered she never left. Eloise looked around the room then, at the flickering candles, at the shadows that no longer felt empty. And she understood. Lillian hadn't vanished. She had become part of the house, just like Eloise was now. Thomas visited often after that, not for research, but for conversation. They sat by the fireplace and shared stories, not just old ones, but new ones too. He brought books. She made soup. The silence between them felt warm, not awkward. One rainy night, as the wind howled against the windows, Thomas asked her if she ever planned to return to the city. Eloise smiled, not with her mouth, but with her whole self. She said the city never really knew her name, but the house did. And in that moment, the wind outside softened. The candlelight danced. And somewhere in the attic, the music box played again, because the house remembered, and it never let go of those who listened. Story 3: Inch the bridge you never crossed. There are places the world forgets. Places too quiet for memory, too still for time. Down a narrow, winding road surrounded by the last stretch of wilderness, there was one such place. A village that barely appeared on any map. No signs pointed to it. No GPS would lead you there. But people still found it. Or maybe it found them. Adrian wasn't looking for it. He was just driving. The days had started to blur together. Work, traffic, small talk, repeat. His phone buzzed constantly. His inbox overflowed. And yet somehow, the loneliest sound in his life was silence. So when the highway split and a small road veered into trees, he turned, without thinking. No destination, no plan, just the hum of tires on unfamiliar pavement and the steady rhythm of his own breath. The forest thickened. The sun fell lower. And just when he thought he might turn back, he saw it. The bridge, old, wooden, moss-covered. It stretched over a narrow river that glowed gold beneath the dying light. He stopped the car, got out. The wind felt different here, cooler, heavier, almost thoughtful, like it carried the weight of stories long untold. The bridge groaned softly under his steps. Every plank creaked as if it were waking from sleep. On the other side, the village waited. No welcome signs, no flashing lights. just a cobbled path and homes tucked between trees. Chimneys puffed gentle smoke. Windows glowed with warmth. And though not a single soul stood outside, Adrian felt seen. Known that he found an inn without asking. A little stone cottage with ivy crawling up its walls and a sign that simply read, Rest. The woman inside didn't ask his name. She just handed him a key and said, Your room is upstairs, last door on the right. Tea will be ready at 7. He slept deeply that night, the kind of sleep untouched by dreams or dread. When he woke, morning light streamed through lace curtains, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel the urge to check his phone. In fact, there was no signal, no Wi-Fi, no noise but the birds and the soft rustle of trees. He stayed point. One day turned into 2, then 3. He began walking the forest trails behind the inn. The air smelled of pine and rain. He saw deer who did not startle, foxes who watched him with intelligent eyes, and once a small white owl that followed him for hours without a sound. That I in the village. He spoke with the baker who sold bread that still steamed when sliced, the librarian who kept no records but remembered every borrower by heart, and the old man who carved tiny birds from driftwood and said little, but smiled like he understood things most had forgotten. But the strangest part was the absence of time. Clocks worked, but no one looked at them. The sun rose and fell as it always had, but people moved at a pace that made the world feel full. And Adrian, he began to breathe differently, deeper, slower, as if his lungs had finally remembered how. Still, questions lingered. Point. One afternoon, Adrian returned to the bridge. He sat at its center, legs dangling over the edge, watching the river move beneath him like molten glass. A voice interrupted the hush, soft, feminine, barely louder than the wind. Most people don't come back to the bridge, she said. He turned, but a woman stood at the far end, her dress the color of storm clouds, her hair braided down her back. She wasn't young, but her face held a kind of stillness, like she had stepped out of a portrait painted long ago. Why? He asked. Because once they cross it, they don't want to remember what they left behind. Adrian looked down at the water. His job, his apartment, his missed calls, his unread messages. What if you can't forget? He whispered. She walked closer. Not everyone is meant to forget, she said. Some are meant to remember, so they can heal. That he asked her name, but she didn't give it. Instead, she sat beside him and told him a story. A boy once lived in the village, she said, long before the bridge grew old. He loved to wander, to draw maps of places he'd never seen. One day, he left to chase those maps, to find the world he thought was missing. He promised to return. But time passed. The bridge changed. The village changed. And he never came back. Adrian was quiet. Did the boy regret it? He asked, and no, she said. But he did forget how to come home. And then she stood, walked back the way she came, and disappeared into the mist. The next morning, Adrian went to the library. He asked the librarian about the bridge. She said it had always been there, older than memory, built from wood that didn't rot and nails that never rusted. Some said it appeared only to those who needed it. Others said it was always there, just ignored by those in too much of a hurry. He asked if anyone ever left the village. Sometimes, she said, but only when they've listened to what the silence has to say. So he listened. He walked the hills. He sat by the water. He lit candles at night and watched their flames flicker without needing to do anything more. And slowly, the ache inside him began to shift. Not disappear, but soften, like a wound finally exposed to air and sun. One night, he returned to the bridge again. This time, the woman was waiting. "Are you ready?" she asked. "For what?" "To remember who you were before the noise." He stepped onto the bridge beside her. The water moved slower now, as if waiting too. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me what I forgot." She looked at him, her eyes filled with something ancient and kind. "You forgot how to rest, how to grieve, how to be still. You forgot that your worth isn't in how much you do, or earn, or achieve. You forgot that being alive means more than surviving. You forgot joy." He closed his eyes, and tears came without force. The wind whispered around them like a lullaby. He stayed on the bridge until morning. Then he crossed back into the village, and he stayed. No one asked when he would leave. No one expected him to. He helped at the inn. He walked children to school. He fixed a broken gate for the baker, read to the blind cat at the library, and brought firewood to the old man who carved birds. Years passed. Or maybe it was only months that he wrote letters he never sent, not because he was afraid, but because sometimes letting go is more sacred than reaching out. And one day, a traveler came, tired, hollow-eyed, lost. Adrian met him at the bridge, and in the quiet that followed, he said only this: "Welcome. You're home now." Story 4. Inch the room that waited. The train had long since passed the last major city when the countryside swallowed it whole. Trees leaned in close to the tracks as if to listen, their limbs tangled like forgotten thoughts. The sky grew soft with the haze of late afternoon, casting everything in pale gold. Clara sat in the last car, a single suitcase beside her, the kind with a worn leather handle and a story behind every scratch. She hadn't looked out the window for hours, but she knew the place was near, not because she recognized the view, but because her chest felt tighter with every mile, as though memory itself was growing heavier. She stepped off the train at a station so small it didn't have a name, just a wooden bench, a rusted sign, and a dirt path that led into the hills. There was no one waiting for her. There hadn't been for a long time. But still, she walked forward, one step after another, until the trees parted and the house came into view. It stood alone on the slope, its roof slightly bowed, paint faded to whispers of green and white. The shutters hung crooked, and the porch sagged as if tired of holding itself up. But it was there, still standing. After all this time, Clara stopped at the gate, which barely held to its hinges. She reached out and touched the wood. It was rough, splintered in places, but familiar. Her fingers brushed over a carved heart in the post, hers and her sister's initials from when they were young. She closed her eyes. She hadn't been back in more than 20 years. The door opened with a groan, and the house exhaled. That it smelled of dust, yes, but also of something warmer, like cloves or cedar, or the last breath of a fire long gone cold. The floor creaked beneath her feet. The walls held echoes. She moved through it slowly, like she was afraid she'd break something or wake someone who had been sleeping. In the kitchen, the clock on the wall had stopped at 2:17. The teapot still sat on the stove. On the table, a bowl of wooden fruit her mother had refused to throw out. Clara reached out and ran her fingers over the edge of the table. She remembered this place. She remembered the way her father sat with one elbow propped as he read the paper, the way her mother laughed with her head tilted back, the way her sister used to draw pictures on napkins, always leaving them behind like breadcrumbs. Upstairs, nothing had changed. The hallway stretched long and narrow, the wallpaper peeling like tired skin. She paused outside the door at the very end. Her sister's room. No one had gone in since the accident. Clara had left not long after. Too much pain. Too many shadows. She ran to a city where no one knew her name, where she could press her grief into silence and pretend it didn't follow her. But it had, in every reflection, in every sleepless night, in every time she found herself pausing in a store when a stranger reminded her of the girl who had once been her best friend. Now, here she was. She opened the door. The room had been untouched for over 2 decades. Posters still lined the walls. A bookshelf sagged under the weight of teenage favorites. A hairbrush with a single strand of golden hair still sat on the vanity. And on the bed, a worn journal, the very one her sister had carried everywhere. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and picked it up. Her fingers trembled as she opened to the last page. If I don't wake up, tell Clara I forgive her. Clara didn't cry, not yet. She closed the book, pressed it to her chest, and exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding for 20 years. Night came gently. The house held her like a lullaby, like a mother who never stopped waiting. She lit a candle and sat in the parlor, staring at the fireplace. She thought about the last time she had seen her sister. They had argued. Bitter words, the kind that stick in your throat long after they're spoken. Her sister had stormed out, taken the old car, gone for a drive to clear her head. The curve in the road, the rain, the call in the middle of the night. She had never forgiven herself until now. The house was silent, but not empty. It felt attentive, like it was listening to her sorrow and offering no judgment, only space. She spent the night in her sister's bed, the journal tucked under her pillow, and she dreamed, not of fire or pain, but of a quiet garden. Her sister was there, seated on a swing, hair lifted by the wind, smiling. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. When Clara woke, the tears came freely. She stayed in the house for a week. Each morning, she swept a new room. Each afternoon, she opened windows and let the stale air out. She found photographs in drawers she didn't remember ever opening. She found letters she had written to her sister but never sent. She read them all aloud. On the fourth day, she heard a sound in the attic, first. She thought it was the wind. But it came again, a soft tapping, like a child's footfall. She climbed the stairs slowly, flashlight in hand. The door at the top stuck at first, then gave way with a sigh. The attic was full of dust and cobwebs, forgotten trunks and winter coats. But in the far corner, beneath a stained sheet, was something she didn't recognize. She pulled it off and found a cradle, rocking gently, as though it had just been touched. Inside was a doll, her doll, the one she thought she'd lost when she was 6. She sat beside it and began to hum a song she hadn't sung in years, a lullaby her mother used to sing. The air grew warmer. The wind stopped, and for the first time, she felt that the house was no longer haunted, just waiting. When she finally left, a week later, she didn't cry. Not because she wasn't sad, but because she didn't need to. She had spoken all the words, felt all the things, forgiven herself, forgiven her sister, She locked the house with the same key she'd used as a child, then slipped the journal into her coat pocket and walked slowly back toward the station. The train came. She boarded. She didn't look back, but the house remained, still on the hill, still surrounded by trees, still holding all that had passed, waiting, perhaps, for someone else, someone who needed to remember, someone who had run too far, someone ready to come home. Story 5 Inch the town that forgot the sea. The map said the town no longer existed. Not officially. A ghost town, some called it. A place swallowed by silence, forgotten by time, and swept off the coast like driftwood in a storm. But Thomas remembered. Not just the name, Belmare, but the sound of it. The way it rolled off the tongue like a secret. The way it tasted of salt and childhood and everything he thought he had buried. He arrived on a fog-soaked morning. The train dropped him off at a broken platform overgrown with weeds. No one else stepped off. No one boarded. The doors closed with a hush, and the train disappeared into mist that he stood there for a while, listening. Even the birds were quiet. The road leading into town had narrowed over the years, grass swallowing the edges, trees leaning in like guardians. He walked with a slow, deliberate pace, each step an echo of memory. The houses looked tired, weathered wood, shuttered windows, fences leaning like old men with stories to tell. The ocean couldn't be seen yet, but he could feel it. It was in the air, in the wind, in the way the earth smelled like forgotten things. The center of town was a general store, long closed, its sign hanging by a single rusted chain. Across from it, the shell of the cafe where he used to sit and watch the sea with her. Elena, that name, he hadn't spoken aloud in years. They were 17, young in a way that felt infinite. Every day was a soft promise. They would meet at the shore, sometimes before dawn, sometimes at dusk. She would bring a sketchbook, he would bring a cheap guitar. They never made plans. They just arrived. Then the storm came. It wasn't just the wind, or the rain, or the waves that swallowed Belmare. It was the silence afterward, when the homes were empty, when the streets no longer echoed with laughter, when the town fell into itself like a closing hand. She had been taken by the water, they said, but he never believed it. Not really. He stayed for 2 days after the storm, searching, calling, crying. But then he left. He never came back. Until now. He found the house he had grown up in. The door was unlocked. No one had lived there since his father passed. The furniture was covered in white sheets, the wallpaper peeling, but it still smelled faintly of cinnamon and tobacco. He walked the halls as if in a dream. He found his old bedroom, the poster still on the wall, the crack in the corner where he used to hide notes beneath the floorboard. That he opened it, and there, folded small and worn thin with age, was a letter in her handwriting. Tommy, if you ever come back, follow the lights. No explanation, no date. That he sat on the floor, the letter pressed to his chest, and let the tears fall. That night, he didn't sleep. He lit a candle and sat on the porch, watching the fog roll in waves across the fields. And just before dawn, he saw it. A light, far off, faint, flickering. He stood, another light, closer, then another, and another. A trail that he followed. The lights were small lanterns, each hung from tree branches or crooked poles, spaced just far enough apart to guide without giving away the destination. He walked through the trees, past what used to be the playground, through the hollowed-out library, down the sloped hill where they once sledded in winter. And there it was. The SEA.IT was still there, still vast. still, endless. And on the shore stood a single figure. She was older. Of course she was. So was he. But it was her. Elena. She turned. Her face held no surprise. Only recognition. You found the lights, she said. He nodded. His throat too full for words. That I knew you would, she said softly. One day, they sat on the sand. The sky above them bled into lavender, the stars fading with the promise of morning. She explained how she had survived the storm, how she had stayed behind when everyone left, how she couldn't bear to leave the town or the memories or the place where she had last felt whole. She left the lights every year, just in case, and every year she waited. They didn't speak of the time they lost. They didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was full, whole. Like waves that always knew they'd return to shore, he stayed with her in the town that everyone forgot. They rebuilt, slowly, a little at a time. They reopened the cafe. They cleaned the library. They tended to the homes, even the ones that would never be lived in again. They wrote letters to no one, planted flowers in broken pots, sang lullabies to the wind. And every night, they lit the lanterns. In case someone else needed to find their way back. Story 6. The Clockmaker's Light. There was once a village wrapped in hills, so far from the city that time seemed to move slower. The roads into it were thin and winding, curling between forests and rivers, almost daring travelers to lose their way. Most did, but those who found it, well, they were usually the ones who needed it most. The village had no name printed on maps. It had no signs pointing toward it. But if you asked the right kind of people, the quiet ones, the ones who listened more than they spoke, they would tell you, softly, about the place where the lights never went out and where the stars always looked closer. In the very center of this village stood a clock tower, older than anything else around it. The bricks were worn smooth by wind and seasons. The great iron bell at the top hadn't rung in decades, but the clock still ticked, steady as a heartbeat. Some said it had no power source, that it ran only on memory and kindness. At the base of the tower was a shop, a small one, just 2 rooms, one for fixing things and one for sleeping. Above the door hung a wooden sign carved in fading letters. The clockmaker, repairs of all things lost. No one knew how long he had lived there. The clockmaker, that is, some said he'd always been old. Others said time didn't quite touch him the way it touched others. He wore a long coat, usually gray or brown, with oil stains on the sleeves and bits of thread tangled in the cuffs. His hands were always working, polishing, winding, tightening, adjusting. Watches, music boxes, pendulums. But not just things. People came to him with more than broken objects. They came with broken hearts, with faded memories, with names they had forgotten and voices they missed. And somehow, the clockmaker always found a way to give something back. He never promised to fix people, only to listen, and to offer a moment of stillness in a world that moved too fast. One autumn evening, as the leaves turned amber and the wind began to smell like wood smoke and rain, a girl named May arrived in the village. She was young, barely 20, but she carried herself like someone twice her age. Her eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She had left the city that morning, taking the first train, then the first bus, then walking the rest of the way until her shoes were soaked and her fingers were cold. She had heard of the clockmaker from her grandmother years ago. A story told before bed about a man who fixed more than clocks. At the time, she thought it was a fairy tale. But now, She needed to believe in something. She stepped into the shop just as the sun disappeared. The bell above the door gave a soft chime, not metallic, but more like wind through glass. The inside smelled of copper and paper and pine wood. Tiny ticking sounds filled the air, watches on hooks, clocks lining the walls, pendulums swinging like small beating hearts. The clockmaker looked up. His eyes were the color of steel left in rain. Calm, a little sad, a little curious. Lost something? He asked. She nodded, unsure where to begin. He gestured to the stool by the counter. Sit. Speak slowly. I have time. And so she did. She told him about the feeling of drifting, of forgetting what laughter felt like, of walking through her life like it was someone else's. She told him about the dreams that had gone quiet, the music she no longer heard, the letters she wrote and never sent. When she finished, the shop was dark except for one lamp on the counter. The ticking around them felt louder now, like the walls were listening. He didn't rush to respond. He simply stood, turned, and reached beneath the counter. He pulled out a small, glass object, a pocket watch without hands. This belongs to you now, he said. She frowned. But it doesn't work. He smiled. It doesn't need to. Just carry it. Every time you feel yourself slipping, hold it. It'll remind you that even time can pause. May stayed in the village longer than she expected. A night turned into a week, then longer. She helped in the shop, sweeping floors, organizing shelves, learning the soft rhythms of repair. She listened to stories from old travelers, from children with too many questions, from wanderers passing through. And each day, she carried the broken watch in her coat pocket. It didn't tick. It didn't shine, but something about it made her feel present. On her last night, the clockmaker walked her to the hill above the village. The stars spilled across the sky like silver dust. The tower chimed, not loudly, just once, as if acknowledging the moment. He turned to her. You're not fixed, he said, but you're awake now. That's all healing really is. She wanted to say thank you, but the words caught in her throat. He handed her a folded piece of paper. If you ever forget again, this will help you remember. She tucked it in her bag, hugged him once, and walked into the night. Years passed. May returned to the city. Her life moved forward. It wasn't perfect. Some days were heavy, but she never forgot the village. The ticking, the silence, the kindness, the feeling of being seen without having to explain everything. She kept the watch. Every time she touched it, she heard the softest sound, like a breath between heartbeats, and she never lost herself again.